Hello, and welcome to the Mother Birth Podcast, where we navigate the terrains of women's health and maternal well being through the lens of yoga therapy and Ayurveda. I am Leanne Matullo, and I'm a perinatal yoga therapist, a doula, writer, creative entrepreneur, teacher, and mother. I'll be your guide as we excavate the mysteries of conscious conception, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, mothering in all its forms, and matters of the feminine. I'm so glad that you're here. Hello, I hope you're doing well and feeling grounded and feeling calm, maybe even creative and inspired. I almost said courageous, which is also true. It's a beautiful fall day here. Finally, it's finally fall. So if you're listening to this episode in real time, around the time when it drops, you're likely experiencing fall if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. And where, even though it's not super sunny out today, it's just I feel like fall is like this coziness, this wrapping around, whereas winter has been like very outgoing or not winter, summer has been very outgoing and loud. Fall is like this initial coziness, and then winter is kind of that wrapping into being held. And I'm so ready for it myself. I love summer. I love all the seasons. I live in a place where there's 4 seasons, and I'm so grateful for that. And so I'm really grateful for fall. And if it's fall for you, I'd love to hear what it looks like, what it feels like, what your feelings and thoughts are about it. I often say to my clients when I ask about the weather, it's actually really not small talk in my world, because as we're talking about yoga therapy and Ayurveda, understanding the elements and the forces that they have on our body is so key. And really what fall is truly about is starting to allow us to go inwards little by little, where our summer has been very outgoing and probably lots of movement. Of course, the days are longer, there's more exuberance, more flamboyance, more color. The fall is this invitation to start to practice a little bit more awareness about the seeds that we have been sowing, what we're harvesting, and allowing ourselves to move further and further inwards, which is really what postpartum is. It's this really big internal journey. And I think that the reason so many of us resist it is because it can be quite uncomfortable. It's slow. You're moving at the pace of an infant. Your body is a lot different. And so postpartum, could be this idea of like an inner autumn and an inner winter. And that really kind of carries me where we're going to be going into our conversation. And I'll be really honest. I really want to talk about this topic. It's so important. Uh, and I am in the thick of primary postpartum, which I'll share what that means in a bit. I'm 10 months postpartum at the time of this recording, and I would be lying if I said that I am always handling it well, because I'm not. I get really tired and fatigued, and I really miss myself. I miss the time with my partner, my husband. And I know this is a season and there's so much joy, there's so much joy in having children. So I'm not even going to go into all of the joys, because if you have them, and I just want to be really honest with you that as I share this conversation, whether you're hearing my voice in your ears or you're watching this on YouTube, it is a real time, and it's not just 6 weeks or 12 weeks. It is years and years and years, and having children affects us for life. So there's no going back to the way things were. There's no going back to normal. There's only moving forwards. There's only moving forwards. And it's one of the ways and the reasons why I started this podcast. So I really wanted to share what's been circling in my head for years, but really for the past few months. And it's also why I'm doing this, is because this is one of the things that doesn't exhaust me. It actually gives me a lot of life and a lot of excitement. If you have been a part of my sphere or my work for a while now, or even if you haven't, I'll share. I've been teaching some sort of movement since I was 14, and I've been teaching yoga since, I don't know, 2013, 2014. I've been in the online space since 2019. So, pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. And I have had a lot of questions and a lot of heart-centered questions. I want to be real there about why I'm not teaching or when I might be teaching online again in terms of an asana yoga that we see in the West capacity. And it just hasn't felt karmically right that I put out videos and movement practices that maybe aren't necessarily right for my body, and I edit them and I put everything out on online into my clients if I am feeling depleted from doing that thing. One of my very favorite teachers who I hope to have on the podcast one day, she really has instilled in me this concept that karmically it is not good for the individual, so the teacher or the student, so you as the listener or you as the receiver, the student of movement or meditation practice, if the student, or excuse me, if the teacher is actually giving from a place of depletion, it's not good for the teacher and it's not karmically good for the student. And I have really taken that to heart. And I'm so excited to share teachings in this way, which is very much a transmission of yoga and Ayurveda, rather than solely asana. And I have a yoga library full of 50 plus practices that if you ever want to try them out, I also have some classes on YouTube. You can do that. And one day, maybe I'll get back to it. Maybe I won't. I don't know. I don't know. And so, again, just being real that I am trying to honor my body as much as I can. And that looks like very gentle yoga, very gentle yoga asana, lots and lots of meditation and breath work. In fact, all of the study that I've done this year has been around a certain type of, we'll say a certain Vedic lineage. The Vedas are thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. The scriptures where yoga comes from, where Ayurveda comes from. And so I have been in deep study of that, and it has been less focused on movement. So I guess what I'm also offering is if, you haven't heard from me in a while in terms of the movement space, that's why. But also if you're there, if you're like, gosh, I'm 9 months postpartum, I'm 10 months postpartum, I'm 12 months, and I still don't feel like I want to dive into certain things for myself or other people, it's really important to honor that because what I've learned from lived experience and also from study is that if we honor that, that's going to set us up for health, for true health, as we get older. It's going to help. It's going to become a result. Here's the word I'm looking for. It's going to result in better health as we age, right? So postpartum is really important. Today, what we're going to talk about is a really unpopular point of view. I wrote a blog post about this and I'll link it in the show notes, but I wrote a blog post about unpopular point of view. You're still postpartum if. And the feedback that I got on this post was beautiful. Number one, probably pissed some people off, to be honest. Number two, but it is the truth. And as I go through some of these pieces, I'll be really frank. And this isn't clinical, this isn't medical. You're not going to look it up and find research on it because this is really from ancient wisdoms. And I've given them some words that would be really helpful for our modern culture. It's from, again, my experience and the experiences of those that I've worked with, hundreds of women, hundreds of women. And I'm really excited to share it with you. And what I'm actually going to talk about first is why postpartum kind of blindsides us, which is numerous and vast. But one of the things I think that we don't honor in our culture is the entrance into the birth portal. I think I've touched on this in some other podcast episodes, and I also have a blog post about this that I'm happy to link to as well. I talk about the birth portal in the trainings that I do and the experiences that I offer, but essentially it's this time right before labor. So it could be days, it could be weeks, but it's right before labor where we start to really go inwards. And what we'll say the overculture calls this is nesting. Call it nesting. And that's cute, They'll say, you I guess actually this doesn't really happen to me, but it did a little bit. Like the cleaning, the prepping the baby clothes, the bottles, all the things. But it's also really this time where you kind of start to want to tune out the outside world. Like maybe you have to work, but you really don't want to be Maybe you're around other people, but you really don't want to be, or maybe you only want to be around the people who really get you, who really hold you and your baby. And again, that could be a couple days before labor, but it could be weeks. And for me, it's been more like weeks where I just really want to start to slow down, or maybe I have to slow down because, you're getting bigger and bigger. And you literally have to slow down. But that's kind of the idea of this entrance into the birth portal. And again, if this is something that's of interest to you, then I really encourage you to check out my work. And we talk a lot more about it. And then, of course, you stay in the birth portal as you labor and as you birth your baby. And this is where, Eugene and I might have talked about it. I can't remember what we talked about. I don't listen to the whole episode back. Um, well, we kind of talked a little bit about what happened to me in my first labor, where I was really entering into this portal and I was allowing myself to enter into this portal. And as I was in labor, the analogy that I use here is like going to the depths of the ocean, like the scary depths where you can't see anything and it's like totally in darkness. And I was going there to retrieve my baby. Some people think about going to retrieve their baby as like going into the stars, into the heavens. Like for me and for many that I work with, not that they would describe it in this way, but it's like going into the depths of self, going into the depths of your soul. And there's a story in the book Circe. I've actually written about this story before, where Circe, this goddess, she goes into the depths of the sea to retrieve Trigon's tail. And I won't give it away because it's a really beautiful book and you should totally read it. But she's going to get Trigon's tail for her son, and her son's grown at this point. And Trigon is this like great sea monster. People are terrified of him. Gods are terrified of him. But she knows that she has to go down there and she has no idea what she's going to witness or to see to get his tail, because she has to get it for her son. That's how I felt in both of my labors. Like I have to go down into the depths and face what might be really scary, face the unknown, face the beautiful, right? And retrieve my baby. And what nobody told me about was that was like entering a different dimension. And I'm not going to say this happens for everyone, and I have not talked about it very much before mother birth, before this podcast. And I don't know if this happens if you have labors that have more intervention, or you might have, and I've had interventions in my labor. So I'm not saying that mine were completely, free births in the ocean. I'm not saying that. And if that was you, that's fine too. That was not me. But what I'm saying is I had largely I had labors that were left alone for the most part. And what scared me was that I felt like I touched this world between worlds. And I won't tell you all the things that I said. You can go back and listen to the episode with Eugene and I. But it really scared me, and it threw me in my labor, and it threw me postpartum, because what I know about birth and being a birth worker is that birth and death, life and death, that's a pivotal time when like the system of the dimensions almost collapse and they are one. Okay. I don't know how to describe it any different than that. Like we think of, we start here with birth and then we end over here with when our life ends with death. And I really see it as this time totally collapses and you're actually able to touch another world that maybe you actually came from, right? And where your baby is coming from. It doesn't have to make sense to you, but that's really what it felt like. And it was scary. And then I felt like I couldn't talk to anybody about it postpartum. And I was still feeling the effects of that postpartum. Again, this may not happen to you, but I think if you allow yourself to really surrender into the birth experience, you'll see the beauty of it. You'll be like, oh my gosh, like this is like a world between worlds. People call it laborland, sometimes, where you're not really here when you're bringing your baby earthside, but you're also not really there, right? Like you're definitely in this dance. If you resist it, it can be scary, or you may not necessarily feel it, or you might actually numb it out and not be there at all. But I still think that there is wisdom in the birth portal, which is what I guide women in, of what happened during that time, and can we go back to it, not necessarily recreate it, but really glean the wisdom from it. That way we can move through it and move on, move on into this new identity, into this new portal of life. So After my baby was born, my first baby, I remember being rocked. I mean, most of us are, right? Rocked by that experience. And I had nerve damage, so like physically there was some things, but it really was this emotional like what in the hell happened there? And why did everybody make uh pregnancy out to be the thing and childbirth ed to be the thing, and it was completely physical and clinical, and why didn't we talk about this was an amazingly spiritual experience, and why was there no support there? And who do I talk to about it now? Because honestly, there's very few therapists you can probably go to have these kind of conversations that aren't going to want to dismiss them or who are going to understand them because it's spiritual, right? It's not just mental, emotional. It's energetic, and there are certain people in the world that can read that and can support that and that can guide that. And I hope you have them. I really do. But I see this time, this denial of this time or this numbing of the birth portal and this race to, prep for labor or plan for labor, which you really can't do, and then try and get back to the life before as some of the reasons why we have such a hard time postpartum and why postpartum becomes pathologized as it is. And so this really leads me into a conversation about postpartum. Let me get some water. Let me get some water. Mm. When we deny parts of ourselves or when we try and speed through processes that really take time, that really require patience and slowness and stillness, it creates upsets, we'll say that, disruptions in the system that like to be called things like anxiety and baby blues, which are baby blues are very real too, postpartum depression, all these things. Like, I really think that people are so afraid of catching, these perinatal mood disorders as if they were a disease, rather than actually thinking, let me like embrace what I'm going through and let it be a teacher, right? Let it be a teacher. So that's my point is that the birth portal, when we honor it and when we understand it and when we know it's coming and we embrace it as something that's beautiful, we allow ourselves to slow down, we allow ourselves to be in this surrender, in this dance of labor, whatever that looks like for you. We allow ourselves to witness something that is otherworldly when we allow ourselves to have this very slow re-entry back into the world postpartum, then postpartum becomes a much different experience. Still hard, still full of challenge and lack of sleep and bodies healing and bleeding and all of these things. But it's a very different experience. It actually has the power to transmute you, right? To almost not transform, I don't want to say that, but to transmute, like grapes to wine, right? The power of transmutation is really what postpartum is. It's also a wake-up call to what's happening around us. And we cannot see, we cannot see really what's happening around us unless we actually wake up to ourselves. And I really believe that birth and postpartum can be that catalyst if we allow it and if we lean into it. So with that, I want to talk about the different stages, phases of postpartum as I see them and as Ayurveda sees them. And I hope that it also gives you a little bit of insight wherever you are, whether you're a couple months postpartum or a couple years postpartum, maybe you're a grandmother, and it just can be something really beneficial to know as you care for your children and your grandchildren. So here we go. Okay, and just a disclaimer, if you notice on YouTube that the lighting is different because it is now dark out, I actually just took a little break in the podcast so I could do dinner and bath and bed for the kids. And one of them is still wandering around the house. But let's go ahead and dive in to the phases and stages of postpartum and why this is so important. And again, unpopular views, right? If you were to go to more allopathic based medicine, we would be talking about, okay, 6 to 8 weeks postpartum, and then that's it. So I do have some notes for this podcast. I'm going to pull them up for a moment. So like I said, I put these into different categories. And as I get into these, I would really love to hear from you. So I know podcast world is like you listen and then maybe listen again the next week and the week after. And what I'm really hoping to do is build true community and connection and relationship. So I really do encourage you to find me on my email. I might be on a break from social media, from Instagram, but you can always message me there and tell me what you're feeling and what resonates. So I share that initial and immediate postpartum. So I use those words interchangeably, initial and immediate postpartum, to refer to that a 6 to 8 week postpartum window that allopathic and Western medicine says is postpartum, and expand it. So, yes, that's an initial and immediate postpartum. And it's actually more like the first 12 weeks after the baby is born, which is known as the fourth trimester. And so, Kimberly Ann Johnson wrote a really lovely book on this topic. But it's really the idea of there's this whole window past when the baby is born, for those first 3 months where the baby, I mean, this is actually extends past first 3 months, but the baby is really reliant on the mother, the birthing person, like almost completely, there's not that we often talk about how babies, if they grew too much in the womb, then it would be hard for them to be born. So they do so much growing, of course, outside of the womb. And if you've had babies, you know that they are particularly helpless, in those first 3 months of life. They need to be fed. They can't sit up on their own, of course. They can't walk like some animals they are born doing. And really, this is also that time of the settling in that there is a mother who is born too. A lot of healing is taking place in this initial and immediate postpartum window. So what we really want is for the mother, the birthing person, to be in bed for much of it, which sounds nuts. Like, or did I say, I think I said 12 weeks. So some people think, oh my gosh, that's nuts. Like, I can't be in bed for 12 weeks. Great. Well, can you do 40 days? Can you do 2 weeks? And the idea is that when you have a baby and the placenta detaches from the uterus, so the inner wall of the uterus, there is a wound the size of a dinner plate. Okay. So there is a wound the size of a dinner plate on the inside of your body, whether you had a vaginal birth or a cesarean birth. And if we had that wound on the outside of our body, we probably would be put on bed rest, right? And so there's a tremendous amount of bleeding that happens in the beginning. Tremendous meaning that it's like over many days, over many weeks, and eventually it'll taper off. The uterus is starting to shrink again in those first weeks. Of course, the body is producing milk and trying to stabilize milk supply when and if you are nursing, if you're breastfeeding your baby. So the postpartum mother who's in this initial and immediate postpartum window, those first 12 weeks, really, and many of us are going to only get a couple weeks, and we really only think in 6 to 8 weeks. But what she needs is a tremendous amount of rest and nourishment. So, not exercise, okay? Not walks around the neighborhood, not trips to Target. No, she needs to be in bed, particularly in the first couple of weeks, not going up and down steps. Hot foods, hot broths, teas, water, animal protein, fat. Like, she needs nourishment because her tissues are trying to replenish themselves. Okay. So, not salads, not smoothies. This is what the postpartum mother needs. And then, of course, like as the weeks go on, maybe at 4 weeks, 5 weeks, there might be some gentle walks, around the house, maybe 5, 10 minutes outside of the home. But we really want to not dive right back into exercise and movement, and definitely not your pre-pregnancy exercise, because what often happens is that women start going too fast and then they actually have injuries. So they might exacerbate or create a diastasis, so an abdominal separation. They might actually create a prolapse. So where the tissue of, say, the uterus is starting to fall out of the pelvic floor, okay? Or could be the bladder, there could be a bladder prolapse. And so a lot of times we think of these happening because of birth, but that's not actually true. It's because of not allowing the body to rest and to replenish postpartum. Let's be real. Our systems and our societies do not acknowledge the magnificence that is birth, that is actually giving life. And when you are using your own body, or when your body is using itself to create a human, to create life, and then to birth that baby, however you birth your baby through your body, and then your body is healing that, that is a tremendous effort. And we really want to honor it. And again, the way we honor initial postpartum is the way that we set up health for the rest of our lives. And if we rush it, your body will know it for a lifetime. And I'm not saying you can't get it back. You can't get that energy back, that vitality back. I don't know, maybe. But if you're really not conscious about it, you really could be affecting your health in detrimental ways for the rest of your life. I'm not saying this just, out of thin air. This is something that Chinese medicine shares, and also something that Ayurveda shares. The other thing that I want to share about this time is that a person who is in this immediate postpartum phase and who has a very young child can expect that that baby is going to want to be on them all the time, and that that would also be normal. It would be normal that a baby cat naps. It would be normal that a baby wants to be held during all their naps. It would be normal that a baby wants to be held while they're sleeping, overnight. Co-sleeping would be normal. Like, these things would be normal. And what we do is we're like, oh my gosh, the baby won't rest. The baby won't lay down on its own. The baby is nursing all the time. It's cluster feeding at night. All of those things are completely normal. And are they exhausting and draining? Yeah. And that's why the mother really needs to be resting. It's because holding a baby all the time, feeding a baby around the clock, and in those first few weeks, if you've had a baby, that nursing is not quick and easy like it is later on. And I don't want to say that and minimize anybody's process, because nursing was really challenging for my first baby. But the reality is it goes from, 35, 45 minutes to, as your baby grows, being like 10 minutes, that their baby is nursing, and then they go off and do their own thing. So nursing a baby 8, 9 hours a day, sometimes more, and then holding your baby is a lot. And so it would be really normal if your baby doesn't want to be in all the gadgets and things that are out there. It doesn't want to be in a baby swing. It doesn't want to be in a bassinet. It doesn't want to be in a bouncer, especially in those first 3 weeks. It wants to be held. And so one of the best things that I can offer is to learn how to baby wear, to learn how to wrap your baby in one of those stretchy fabric materials. There's all kinds of different companies, Moby, Solly, so many. You can use an ergo, which is a more structured wrap, but learn how to baby wear, which is actually really great for breastfeeding. It's really great for bonding. It's really great for your hormones, for regulating the baby's body temperature, breathing, all of these things it's really great for. And it leaves your hands free so you can eat, you can kind of pick up things around the house, but try not to baby wear super early on. Wait at least, 3, 4 weeks until you've given your pelvic floor a bit of a rest, because all that weight holding the baby will put more weight on the pelvic floor. And what we know is that even when we're not postpartum or initial immediate postpartum, when we're tired, when we're stressed, that exacerbates the really strong, often deemed negative emotions. So it exacerbates the feelings of anxiety and frustration and weepiness and overwhelm, right? We know that. And so if all of this change is happening and there's a human that's literally attached to you all the time, the biggest thing that you need is rest, and then needing people to also rally around you. So making sure that you have, or hopefully that you can ask people for help, that you can get some community here, whether it's family or your neighbors, or hiring help if you're able to do that, like a postpartum doula. This is the reality of that immediate time. And so again, we rush it. We totally rush it. We have a really hard time with slowing down to the pace of an infant. And if we knew okay that this was coming, or even if you're thinking about your postpartum time and now you're reflecting on it like, wow, that process was rushed for me, or I had to go back to work really quickly. Even knowing this can be very healing. Even knowing this information can be very, very healing. And just recognizing that you did the best that you could with what you had, and that maybe what you were feeling in the moment of maybe not wanting go back to work so early, not wanting to find care for your child, whatever it might be, that perhaps is the real normal, where what we've normalized is actually not normal. I hope that makes sense. Much more to say on initial and immediate postpartum, but I'll continue. I'll continue on. And the second stage of postpartum that I share about in my work is primary postpartum. So this period immediately follows that 12 weeks postpartum, the fourth trimester, and lasts up to baby's first birthday. You heard that right, up to the first birthday. So 1 full year postpartum. This individual, this is where I'm at, this individual still requires a lot of rest, a lot of rest. Okay, the hormones are still stabilizing. There's a hormone called relaxin that's still in the system, particularly if you're breastfeeding. It makes your joints pretty unstable and really flexible. And so it makes the postpartum individual more susceptible to injury. Meaning that, again, when we're talking about exercise and movement, we don't want to go back into pregnancy exercise. It's not appropriate. It's just not, I'm channeling a teacher. It's not appropriate. It's not appropriate to do that. And the question becomes why? Like, why am I doing that? Because I can guarantee for most individuals, if you really check in with your body, it doesn't actually feel good. And if you're more depleted after you do that movement or after you do that exercise, then you are energized or stable in a place of what we call sattva, which is equilibrium, peace, harmonious, centered, grounded, right? If you are depleted, tired, more tired, then it's not the right thing for you. So, again, the theme is that mothers who move really quickly into these intense practices, whether by movement or maybe it's by your job, and maybe you don't really have much choice in the latter, they are often the ones that are more depleted by the end of their baby's first year and for many years to come. And that's an unpopular truth, but it is true. It is the truth. Postpartum depletion is wildly common in the first year, and I really want us to understand that. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about how I haven't felt like I've been able to give in the way of teaching yoga asana because it is so easy for me to feel depleted nowadays. And again, like this is where, like, sometimes even for myself, I get really down on me. Like, why? Like, why can't I have more energy? And the reality is, if you are caring for a baby around the clock, whether, you're staying at home or working or doing some combination of the two, if you're feeding a baby with your body, if you're taking care of other humans as well, that's what's happening in my life, maybe other creatures, pets, like that is a lot. And we're starting to, which is really scary, and I kind of see this happening in both spaces. We're starting to treat humans more and more like machines who don't need the same levels of rest and nourishment and deplete or to restore our depletion that humans do, right? We're not machines. And then I see this other side of people starting to wake up to the fact that, wait a second, why are we doing this to ourselves? Like, why are we being treated like the technologies that we're creating? We're not that. We're not wired that way. So I want to reiterate that 6 months is still postpartum, 9 months is still postpartum, 12 months is still postpartum. And if there's any way that you can take some of the pressure off, and I'll let you decide what that might be. Like, what is a way that I can unburden myself? If it's around my work, if it's around something in my home, if it's around a volunteer activity, what is a way that I can get more rest? And usually it's not what can I add, it's what can I subtract. And I have another essay about that too, about how it's really our habits and things we think that we need to do that are depleting us. And that by maybe letting some of those things go, that we can actually arrive at a place where we're really able to deeply nurture ourselves or allow ourselves to receive the nurturance of other people or of nature, whatever might surround us. A big thing that I tell myself and my clients is that rebirths take time, and that as a mother, you are being reborn into a new and likely a truer version of yourself. And I imagine that that continues the further you go down your motherhood journey. Maybe some of those out there that have older children or are grandparents or great grandparents, I'd love to hear your take on that. I imagine that as you continue to grow in your motherhood journey, you become even more of who you already are. Perhaps that's if you allow it, right? Okay. And then lastly, sort of, I'll talk really briefly about the last phase that I see. But lastly, there is secondary postpartum. So just because we've had our babies a year ago doesn't mean that we should feel radically better. In fact, a lot of people start saying, "Oh, like 18 months was this kind of like, whoa, I got going after a year again. I kind of felt good and moved up back into certain spaces and tried to pick up to the same pace as before I had a baby or got pregnant. And now I'm really tired again." Well, there's a reason for that. In Ayurvedic medicine, again, this is the lineage that I study. In Ayurvedic medicine, the teachings share, the lineage shares that we actually don't want to get pregnant before 3 years postpartum, meaning that we want to space our pregnancies at least 3 years apart. That also can be a pretty unpopular thought, point of view. I'm not even going to say opinion because the Vedas aren't opinions. And there's nothing wrong if you're like, well, I have my kids a year and a half apart or 2 years apart. Like, no, no, no. Like, we're not saying yes or no. What the Vedas are trying to say is it is an incredible amount of effort on behalf of the whole system, the body, the energetic body, the emotional, spiritual self. It's an incredible amount on this system to create life, birth life, nurture life. And so that we need time. We need time to actually rebuild the tissues, what they call the dhatus. We need time to rebuild all of this in our body before we want to get pregnant again because, and you might have experienced this, when we have pregnancies that are really close together, sometimes we have even more issues with depletion. It can be harder to come back from. I'm not saying that you can't. Okay. It's just the idea of what I actually see this as it's actually really freeing to think, okay, that makes a lot of sense. That this was an incredible amount, that I grew a human for 9, 10 months, and then I birthed that human. And then the next year I was nurturing that human and making milk and not sleeping and actually going through all my own internal processes, my own kind of like contraction and expansion that nobody can actually see. And that was maybe over 2 years, right? So we need that same amount of time to heal the body before we think about actually becoming pregnant again. So this isn't a shame blame game. This is more of a, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like if I'm still feeling a certain way at a year and a half postpartum or 2 years postpartum, to actually expand that definition, which is really what I'm hoping that this work does in terms of perinatal yoga therapy. I have a friend that often repeats this back to me, and sometimes I forget that I've said it. But this is a time, these years, to keep your world really small. So, yes, I mean, I traveled. We went around the world when Bodhi was 2. Literally, we went to go visit my brother in Japan. But for the most part, you want to keep your world small. You want to stay close to home as much as you can. Going, parks, playing outside, whatever that is, like close by in your neighborhood, keeping your community small, letting people in that are really uplifting and nourishing to you in your home, but I also mean like just in your inner energetic space, in your sphere. So whether you're talking on the phone or online or whatever, and really making sure that you are doing the things that feel life giving and supportive because you are doing so much life giving. Yeah. And then finally, the reality is that postpartum is for life. So this notion of going back to quote unquote normal is not reality. I want to go back to normal. Like it's not like you have a baby and then you continue the life that you had before baby just with that baby on your hip. Like that's a false story that's in our head. It's never going to be that way. Never. And our babies are constantly going to change. Some won't sleep through the night for many years, you know. Uh, and that's the beauty of it. And one of the things that we're learning through this process of postpartum and the expanded definition is how to detach from certain stories, how to surrender. Okay. Aparigraha is one of the words, Ishvara Pranidhana is another one of the words in Sanskrit of detaching, of non-attachment to what we think life should be and surrendering to what is. And actually the translation of surrender, that Ishvara Pranidhana, is the direct translation is surrendering to God. And you can insert divine or universe or mother nature, whatever, but surrendering to letting go of the control that you think you have on your life. Let me just say that again. Surrendering to letting go of the control that you think you have on your life. Because the reality is we have a lot less control than we think we do. And that's really kind of the theme of this first season has been all the ways in which we try and control certain outcomes and how do we loosen the reins a little bit and receive, intend, come back to self and heart. And my guess is when I tie these pieces together, when I weave in the birth portal, so that time before birth, moving into labor and birth, and this time afterwards, and we're leaving the birth portal after the fourth trimester, and we're moving into the primary and secondary postpartum phases. When we're tying all of that in, if we perhaps were given some of this education, allowed ourselves to learn some of this information and to receive this wisdom during pregnancy and even before it, even if you're planning in terms of conscious conception, if you're planning for a pregnancy, then this period of postpartum, these years of postpartum might be more easeful. I think they would be more easeful. They'd be more full of health and wonder and wisdom. And it would really change the game of, again, the health of women, of mothers, of babies, and I've said it many times, but eventually of whole communities and societies. Systems would absolutely change if we had this information. And so, even if you're not pregnant or in these stages of postpartum, knowing this information and being able to share it and even being able to understand it for your friends, for your loved ones, for your daughters, for your granddaughters, for your nieces, for your cousins, whomever it is, for your employees, for your colleagues, like really being able to understand it and to practice that compassion and empathy can go such a long way to really radically transforming the way that women as a whole are treated on this planet. So, my question, and it's in my essay for us, is how are we allowing the postpartum mothers in our lives to be in their postpartum? And did we allow ourselves? Are we allowing ourselves? Yes or no? Why or why not? Why or why not? What are you afraid of? Right? What is there to be afraid of by resisting this time? So, I hope that this felt expansive for you. I hope that all of these episodes have felt expansive to you so far, that maybe you've gotten some nuggets of wisdom or some aha moments of like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But the big thing, especially about this piece on postpartum, is we really need to stop rushing to pathologize or to diagnose something being wrong with a postpartum individual and starting to recognize that there is something much greater at play that comes with a whole host of emotions. And if we can actually just understand that there's different phases and stages of what it means to actually be pregnant, to move through a portal like birth, and to actually give life, and then to continue to nurture life, if we recognize that there's so much more to that, then perhaps we'll have more empathy and compassion and we'll stop rushing to diagnose and actually lean back and say, how can I support these individuals in my life? And if I'm in that space, such as myself, how can I ask for the help that I need? How can I let some things go? I'm going to read a paragraph from something that I wrote because I think it's really powerful and important. Patriarchal patterning runs deep. Denying yourself rest, denying yourself nourishment, denying yourself compassion, demanding that you perform in the ways you did pre baby or babies is a symptom of internalized patriarchal structures. By holding this space for ourselves and other mothers, we disrupt the harmful pattern. If we call ourselves feminists, we must honor this. With that, I leave you. Thank you for sharing this journey with me, for being a part of Mother Birth. I believe this will be the last episode of the season. I'll do a little season wrap up. Uh, but I would really love to have a second season. I intend to. And I'd really like to hear from you. I'd really like to hear from you on what topics you'd want to talk about. If there are individuals that you would recommend I interview, I have a sweet list of individuals that I would love to invite on and have more interviews in the second season with some solo casts peppered in there. And I'm also toying with some ideas as Uma, our daughter, approaches her first year of life, some ideas of how to expand this work, and one of them looks like a actual training. So if you are called to this work and you actually want to teach or take this work of perinatal yoga therapy and Ayurveda into your work wherever you are, or maybe you're an auntie or a grandmother or a parent and you want to support the women, maybe your children, your grandchildren in your life. I'm thinking about doing this. This is something that has been on my mind, and I would love to hear if that's also of interest to you. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much for the excitement and the love of this first season. And I can't wait to share more with you in the coming weeks and months. Take good care.